Hi, I'm David, and in today's diagnostic module we're going to be looking at two-wire sensor testing. These are fairly simple sensors, and combined with schematic diagrams it'll enable us to determine whether we have the correct voltages on the pins. From this we can determine whether we have a faulty sensor or faulty wiring. Now let's go and have a look at the basic circuits. Here we can see a pull-up and a pull-down circuit. Both of them are using temperature sensors. Temperature sensors are common to measure air, coolant and exhaust temperatures. These two circuits work very much the same. As the resistance of the sensor changes, the signal voltage also changes. The module then interprets that signal change as a temperature. Let's have a look at the pull-up circuit first. When we're looking at these circuits, the first thing we do is we remove the sensor from the circuit. We determine what voltages we should have on pins 1 and pin 2. In our case, we should have 5 volts on pin 1 and a ground on pin 2. But always remember to check the schematic for your vehicle and make sure that you have the correct voltages. So how do we go about testing now? We put the multimeter from pin 1 to battery ground and we should see 5 volts. If we don't see 5 volts, we move the multimeter onto the positive terminal. If we see 12 volts there, that indicates that we have a short to ground on that wire, and that's our fault. If there's no 12 volts and there's no 5 volts, the most likely cause is an open circuit between pin 1 and the module. Moving on to pin 2, we should see a ground. So we put the multimeter between pin 2 and the positive terminal of the battery. We should see 12 volts. If we don't see 12 volts, we put the multimeter lead onto the negative terminal of the battery. Here we're looking for a short to voltage. If there's no voltage there, then we must have an open circuit between pin 2 and the module. If there is voltage there, it indicates we have a short to voltage somewhere on that circuit. If we have 5 volts on pin 1 and 0 volts or ground on pin 2, the only fault that we can have now is the sensor. And that's how easy it is to test. We'll now have a look at testing the pull-down circuit. Testing a pull-down circuit is very similar. First thing we do is remove the sensor. The next thing we need to do is determine the voltages at each pin. In our case, we have 0 volts or a ground on pin 1, which comes through our pull-down resistor, and we have 5 volts at pin 2 from our 5 volt reference. But always remember, check your schematic diagram for the correct voltages for your vehicle. We're now going to test pin 1. So we test pin 1, which is our signal circuit. We put our multimeter between pin 1 and battery positive. We should see 12 volts. If we don't see 12 volts, we move to the battery negative terminal and look for a short to voltage. If there's a short to voltage, that's our fault. If there is no short to voltage, the most likely cause is an open circuit between pin 1 and the module. Moving on to pin 2, we should see 5 volts. So we go between pin 2 and battery negative, looking for our 5 volts. If we don't have 5 volts there, we move immediately to the positive terminal of the battery and look for a short to ground. This will be indicated by 12 volts on the multimeter. If we have no short to ground and we have no 5 volts, the most likely cause is an open circuit between pin 2 and the control module. And that's how we test our pull-up and pull-down two-wire sensor circuits. Now let's see on the vehicle how it's done. On the vehicle we're going to be looking at a pull-up two-wire sensor. In this case it's going to be the engine coolant temperature sensor. I've referred to my schematic, and on the signal wire I should have 5 volts. And on the other side of the circuit I should have a ground. So I've turned my ignition on, I've got my digital multimeter there, and whenever we're probing a connector we always make sure that we use the correct tools. So I'll check my signal wire first. I'm looking for 5 volts. So I hook my meter up and I go to the negative terminal of the battery. And there I have 5 volts. So that's all good. I'll now move to the other pin. This time I'm looking for a ground, so I'll go between there and the positive terminal of the battery, and I'm looking for 12 volts or battery voltage. In this case, there we are, 12.72 volts. So that means that pin's okay. If there's a fault with this circuit, there's only one place that fault can now be, and that's in the sensor itself. So you can quite happily replace that sensor knowing that that's the faulty component. So that was a sensor fault. Now let's have a look at some of the circuit faults we might encounter. I've got my ignition turned on, my multimeter set on voltage, and I've got my probe in the signal wire. I'm looking for 5 volts again. So I'll go to the negative terminal of the battery, 0 volts. So there's obviously something wrong there. The next thing I do is go straight to the positive terminal of the battery, and there I can see I've got battery voltage or 12 volts. That indicates that I've got a short to ground on that signal wire. That's my fault. Quite easy to find. Let's have a look at another fault. Ignition on, multimeter on voltage, and we're again hooked up into our signal wire. I'm expecting to see 5 volts. Negative terminal of the battery, 0 volts. So I immediately go to the positive terminal of the battery. Again, 0 volts. That's told me that I don't have the 5 volt reference I should have, and I don't have a short to ground. So the most likely cause of this fault is an open circuit between the pin and the module. Pretty simple. Let's have a look and see what type of fault we have this time. The ignition's turned on, multimeter set up, we're in the signal wire. I'm looking for 5 volts. Negative terminal of the battery, there's my 5 volts. I know that circuit's good. We'll now move to the other pin. On this pin, we're looking for a ground. So I'll go to my 12 volts. I've got nothing. I'll now go to my negative terminal. This time I'm looking for a short to voltage. Nothing. If I got a voltage reading there, that would be a short to voltage, and that would be my problem. But my problem at the moment is I've got an open circuit between this pin and the module. And that's how we test 2-wire sensor circuits. It's fairly simple, and all we used was a digital multimeter. In another module, we looked at how DTCs are set and 5 common causes. And 3 of those common causes set the same DTC. With this knowledge, you should now be able to differentiate between those different causes. We've looked at faults on the signal circuit, the sensor itself, and on the ground circuit. We've looked at shorts to voltage, shorts to ground, and open circuits. And always remember that when you're doing this testing that the battery is your best source of voltage and ground. Using this knowledge and the schematics, you should be able to diagnose any 2-wire sensor on any vehicle. And remember, in today's technology, training is your key to success. Bye for now.